Every idea, every story starts with a spark, a tiny light that glows. But to speak up, to be heard, to innovate takes courage. We're here to ignite that tiny spark. We're here to foster Canadian voices, our narratives, our ideas. We're here to spark courage. Our logo is a showcase for our culture, our storytellers, our innovators, and it reflects our creators and communities. The Spark is a catalyst to push boundaries, to drive the future, and for Canadian voices to be heard on a global stage.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the Future Film Showcase 2021 edition, hosted by CBC Gem. My name is Zachary Goldkind, and I'm the lead programmer of the festival. I'm very happy to be joined today by Max Shoham for a small conversation about not only their film featured in our program this year, but their whole body of work, and ideally we'll be able to dig a bit into the core of their artistic practices. Max, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
Thanks so much for having me. No, this is fantastic. I'm doing really well, and I'm just stoked to be here and really honored to be asked questions about my practice. So thank you.
No, and I'm happy to have you here. And so with that, I'd like to just jump into it. We don't have much time. So Max, we're showing Sophie and Jacob, a fully animated short during FOFS 2021. Yet, through your filmography, much of which is available on your Vimeo page, in fact, you seem to oscillate between animation and live action work, some films very much hybridizing the forms. Could you speak a bit on your practice of hybrid creation? How are you conceiving each work? How do you decide to implement animation?
Yeah, thank you. So I think I've always felt that the greatest strength of animation is the worst weakness of live action, and the greatest strength of live action is the worst weakness of animation. So I'd say that what's so amazing about animation is that as an animator, you have 100% control over everything that's happening on frame. And really the only thing that's limiting what you can show is your imagination. And quite literally anything you could think of that you could represent visually, can be in your film for very little, for no money at all, just the labor and time. But as an animator, you also lose any sense of spontaneity in your storytelling. And that's where I think live action has its strengths for me. As a filmmaker, I love the spontaneous feel of discovery on set, and the spontaneous kind of feeling of discovery and collaboration that happens on set can birth a lot of beautiful moments. And making a live action, for me, it feels a lot more like finding the film as you produce it, rather than animation, which needs to be, just based on the format, needs to be highly planned since the first second. You need to make your keyframes, and then you need to sit down and do in-betweens for 10 hours for one shot. And you lose that sense of lightning in a bottle spontaneity that you have in live action. So I think forever, I will be flicking between the two mediums, because I think both of them have so much to offer in different ways. And I think it just depends on what story I'm trying to tell.
That's great. And to just, dive a little deeper. So looking to Sophie and Jacob, to Seeking Anthony, to another one of your works, The End of the Summer, your animation seems to try and give opportunity for attempts at reconciling with imagination. How near unbearable emotions, all of which berate one with thousands of images that try to make sense of circumstances, become manifest through the interaction of an impossible presence. Seeking Anthony imagines a final interaction. The End of Summer imagines a persisting and welcomed ghost. Sophie and Jacob imagines a history that it must bring to life. What can you say that your films have allowed you to express in manners unimaginable through other forms?
Well, I love that explanation. That, first of all, that was beautiful. I'm like really touched. I've never heard anyone like analyze what I do like that. So that's very touching. I would say just Sincerely Anthony and The End of Summer specifically, I made at a time of mourning in my life. And I have a very unhealthy habit of delving into fantasy when things go poorly in my life. So there was a personal tragedy. I was coping with the death of my best friend who committed suicide. And I found myself painting alternate pictures in my head about what could be happening. Oh, he's just somewhere else or something like that. And that kind of let me my kind of vacation into fantasy to try to bottle away what the processing of the trauma and of his death. Kind of realizing that I was doing that inspired the film Sincerely Anthony. And in that film, it starts in live action, and it starts in this kind of frenetic, stressed out pace of a chase, two friends, one is chasing the other as the other tries to escape. And then it kind of crosses over into animation as the situation becomes more dire for the person's life. And at the end, when they have their confrontation, everything is animated, and it's kind of this fantasy world where a letter is given as some sort of explanation for the suicide, where in reality I did not get a letter. So that film was I made it only a couple months after my friend passed, and it was kind of a lot of really raw emotions, trying to make something and trying to keep myself busy and process the trauma by making art. And that's why I think it's a little bit confused as a film. I have a hard time rationalizing why it turns into full animation at the end, because I think I didn't necessarily know what I was doing. I was just making for the sake of making. But End of Summer, I think animation lets me, I think you said it beautifully. It lets me objectify, objectify my imagination in my films, and kind of show an End of Summer, especially the animation is very quiet and simple. It's just these etched lines that I'd etched pencil strokes, basically just showing a silhouette of a person who's kind of there, kind of not. And I think it let me show the kind of ephemeral feeling of his absence in a way that I wouldn't have necessarily been able to capture to the same degree in live action. So I think it is special when the two mediums connect. And then Sophie and Jacob was just a matter of budget, honestly. I don't know if I had $200 million and 60 people with costumes and a green screen in a studio, and we could shoot in the Mediterranean, I would love to make it a live action. But because I'm just one kid and at the time in a bedroom in Toronto with a tablet, it's going to be animated. I mean,
the imagination, the animation, I think gives the opportunity for that history to become something other than the palpable reality that we understand it was. It allows a subjectivity, and it allows also a kind of very raw, immediate emotionality from you, specifically, one that, right, because it's you recreating this history rather than, perhaps, capturing this story of your family, in real life. It has to come from like total fabrication of whatever you can imagine. I think that adds a far more intimate touch, specifically, I mean, in the way that you transition here. I mean, I guess, this work in opposition to something like Seeking Anthony, where we go into, in fact, the live action to sort of realize the imagination, but all of that history is sort of almost just some evocation of memories and stories that you've been told.
Well, actually, funnily enough, it started as a documentary. Sincerely, okay. Anthony started as a documentary. I mean, no. Sophie and Jacob started as a documentary. I began the process making an experimental documentary with my family members, basically interviewing them. And then the plan was to compile a bunch of interviews telling the story and combine that with live action footage of the interviews and then animation, like a couple animated sequences. I've done films like that in the past. I really like making kind of experimental mixed medium style documentaries. And I thought that would just be a really good way to share testimony kind of closer to the source than myself, because I would be interviewing my grandparents. And actually that last shot in Sophie and Jacob is my grandmother lighting prayer candles during Seder. And I took that shot for the documentary, which would have been Sophie and Jacob. But as I worked on it, it slowly morphed into a fully animated narrative. And that process was really weird and unorthodox and took a long time of figuring out what the film needed to be. But it did begin as a documentary.
That actually, it touches on my next question, was mostly to ask about sort of that process of crystallizing, this history into animation, just speaking about sort of, I guess, your emotional process and the process of sort of, over, I guess now it's like, when did you decide to, transition from experimental documentary to an animated, more fiction film? And how, I guess the questions you were asking yourself, and I guess the history you must have been reckoning with in terms of, being in the present to make a documentary about history that, we can't see anymore.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. So in Sophie and Jacob's case, I started by, I wanted to make a kind of story-driven experimental documentary, but then I realized the format was really keeping the story at an arm's length. And as I pieced together this film, I'm not suggesting that documentaries necessarily keep the story at an arm's length, but just this one in particular, as I was making it, as I was forming it, it just seemed too remote, not empathetic, like not evoking enough, perhaps not evoking as much empathy as and pathos as I was shooting for. Because I think with stories about and around the Holocaust, like Sophie and Jacob, it's really important to, I think it's in a tactile kind of objective for a filmmaker. For me, it was really important to make people reconcile with what had happened. Make people, I'm trying to phrase this well, make people reconcile and empathize with the types of historical people who are so often reduced to figments and numbers. Because thinking about millions and millions of people dying and millions more being displaced, those are numbers, those are big numbers. And most people who don't have family who were affected by the Holocaust or the spread of Nazism around Europe, as my family was affected by, a lot of the time it can be hard to come to grips with just numbers. And when you really laser in, when you focus on a story of a couple people, that can be a lot more affecting for people who are kept at a distance from the event, from the historical event. And as a filmmaker, I wanted to make Sophie and Jacob to evoke empathy in people and to evoke empathy with refugees in general, because there are massive refugee crises all across the world. I started thinking about making Sophie and Jacob at the height of like the Syrian refugee crisis. And I was just hearing a lot of people talk about that crisis with such a lack of empathy. And it really disgusted me in a way that I felt that human lives are being reduced to numbers. And I just wanted to evoke an empathy for refugees. So I felt that, okay, circling back to the film, this has been a run on, I'm sorry, but circling back to the film, I felt that it was really important for me to evoke that empathy with the characters and empathy with refugees in general. So I thought it should be closer to the characters. You should see their romance. You should see their lives. You should see the small details about them as people. So little by little, the interview footage started dwindling until it was only narrative and only focused on the lives. There's barely a second in the movie without either Sophie and Jacob on frame. Like there's only, I think, two scenes without either of them on frame. And I just wanted it to be more personal and intimate, and animation was the best way to do that.
I mean, personally, the most striking part of the film, I must be honest, is in fact your credit sequence. Just because of the way it connects you so intimately with that history and with the images that you've evoked. I mean, obviously, my own family, though not, affected by the Holocaust, they were, kicked out through pogroms at the beginning of the 19th century in Russia, and then kicked out of Germany after World War I. And so to be able to to understand, I know it's incredibly important to myself to understand the lineage and the historicity in a family tree, and understanding the kind of erased history that like the Russian Empire had beset the Jewish people to just to see that line be tracked. So obviously, manifest, for me, just very much, it hit a spot that I wasn't anticipating being hit. So, for that, I just want to say thank you.
That's humbling to hear, honestly. Thank you.
And then, the last question that I have, it's a lot lighter. And it's mostly just, it's about, I recently learned, you're at Concordia for animation, correct? So
correct.
I'd love to hear, I guess, why Concordia? What are you looking to do here? What's your, you're very young. And I'm I'm intrigued by the dedication that you have to your practice, specifically with the hybridity, and how what your ideas, plans, or and what you can imagine for yourself through the practice of developing it.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so wait, I'm gonna answer that one by one.
Of course.
So why Concordia? It's a Canadian school. I did not want to move to the States to go to university because tuition prices are too expensive. I got into Cal Arts actually with a scholarship, but even with a scholarship, it was just not enough for me and my family at the time. And if you're Canadian, going to Canadian schools is relatively inexpensive compared to American art schools. So that was why it was basically just Canadian universities. And then I really wanted to get the hell out of Toronto. So I moved to, I'm very lucky to have been able to move to Montreal, which is a city I love. And Concordia is in Montreal. And I heard that you could get a pretty good education here. So here we are.
I've heard that too.
Yeah. And about my plans, like as a filmmaker and like what I plan to get out of university, I've just really wanted to be a filmmaker since I was in like basically second grade. My parents are both like cinephiles, and like I grew up watching movies with them, and I had this like very onset like love of film and just like the story, the storytelling of the filmmakers and like the communal viewing experiences. like I never watch movies. I find that I rarely watch movies alone because so much of the fun for me and so much of the the pleasure of the experience is watching with other people and then discussing afterwards. That's 90% of the viewing experience for me, is like the discourse that comes right after it's finished. And I fell in love with that very, very young and have been obsessed with it ever since. I want to be a filmmaker. I have no idea what that means. No idea what that means. I don't know what it will mean in 30 years, but I want to do it, whatever that may be. And a portfolio is a good place to start if you want to be a filmmaker. And there are not that many better places to make a portfolio than a university. So here we are.
No, that is very understandable. Very understandable. No, I'm very much in similar positions as you are.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, Max, thank you so much for this talk and this conversation. It was wonderful having you, and I hope everyone watching this, make sure to watch and checks out Sophie and Jacob, which is streaming, should be right now on CBC Gem, which is so wonderful. Thank you so much, Max.
No, it's been a pleasure, and that's mind blowing. That's so mind blowing. No, nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you as well.